Hello, everyone. My name is Daniel, and I'm back in response to Nick Vanderland's response to my checking of him in the days of the flood, where he attempted to disprove the lunar calendar by showing that you can't get 150 days. And I showed a way that you could, and then he came back with a new video that addresses me and then claims to checkmate me. And so let's dive in to what he had to say. So his new video, he says that you have to look at the Hebrew definitions of the words to pull out some extra information, which he forgot to include at the first time. And this is that the waters prevailed, and he highlighted this word prevailed, or have strength, or confirmed. It's in the sequential imperfect tense, upon the earth for 150 days. So he says 150 days of the waters prevailing. And then the waters returned from off the earth continually. And after the end of 150 days, the waters were abated. And he then highlighted the word abated. It says to lack, to be gone, or decreased. And then the ark rested on the 7th month on the 17th day. So his argument is the waters cannot simultaneously be prevailing and abated, right? It can't be done at the same time. And therefore his previous granting of inclusive counting of the 17th day was retracted. And he claimed, checkmate, you can't use inclusive counting to get your 150 days. He quoted these exact same Strong's definitions of the words, right? So you get really precise in here. So his argument is that the waters were present for 150 days and gone after the 150 days, and thus the ark had to rest on the 151st day, which would then be the 17th. So either way, he's in trouble, or he's saying that I'm in trouble because I can't get that. I don't get to count the 150th day, the 17th. And I think I actually made a mistake here, because if this was his interpretation, it'd actually favor me more. He's saying that the 150-day count doesn't get to count the last day that I was counting. So, to fully satisfy his argument, he has to claim that the waters change from prevailing to lacking at the exact moment one calendar day switches to another calendar day. Because otherwise you could use inclusive counting. Because you could say, well, on this calendar day, the waters did abate. They were abated. And they were also prevailing for part of the day on that particular day. So the only way that you get a perfect division is if the waters are prevailing, and then directly at the change of day, whether it's sunrise or sunset, whatever it is, that's when the switchover has to happen. That's how precise he's claiming the language is. So I think that his checkmate is proving something that depends upon an extremely subjective parsing of the words to mean something far more specific than the grammar warrants. It's like debating someone on the meaning of the firmament or the circle of the earth, where they imbue their definition and constraints on the words as if they are the one and only possible meaning. If you want to checkmate someone in an argument, you must win using the most generous definition of terms you can grant your opponent, not the most advantageous definition of terms that favor your interpretation. At best, we can conclude that the text is too ambiguous to give a definitive answer, and if Yah were to speak and give the true answer, we could say either calendar. He could say either calendar without making the text overtly false. So, this is going to be subjective. There's no way to get to the bottom of this, because it's how you're interpreting the words. So, let's look at further assumptions that are baked into his supposed proof. And so when designing this disproof challenge, there were some built-in assumptions that further undermined the legitimacy of the test in the first place. So the flood completely reshaped the surface and the tides and the water, and it impacted when you're moving that much mass and the waters and the oceans are rising and falling, that causes the speed of the Earth's rotation to change. And it can change by enough to lengthen the day, right? How fast is the Earth spinning if it just changes by a couple percent? All these calculations that from the modern world cannot apply to the days of Noah. It has to assume that Joshua's long day had no lasting impact on the length of the day or the orbit of the moon, or that Ezekiel's sundial moving backward 10 degrees had no impact on the length of the day or the orbit of the moon. And anytime I try to use sun, moon, and stars arguments in modern physics simulations to go back and prove things beyond about 700 BC, no one is willing to accept any arguments, because there's just too many unknown unknowns about what exactly was involved in these miracles. So we just can't know from modern observations what was observed that long ago. So it's a fruitless effort to attempt to disprove a lunar calendar with this many variables in the mix. So, since his assumption is if you can disprove the lunar calendar, his calendar must be true. Well, what if we can disprove his calendar? Does that make the lunar calendar true? And then what if both things are accepted as disproven at the same time? Is neither calendar true? Because otherwise we have a contradiction. If I can disprove him and he just disproved me, then neither calendar works, and we don't know what calendar is what. So let's dig in and see if I can provide a more objective disproof of his calendar than the very subjective disproof he's given for lunar calendars. So on his 364-day calendar, he always starts the year on the day after the spring equinox. And it always starts it on the the fourth day of the week. Is always the first day of the first month. So Passover always falls on the third day of the week. So here's his calendar, taken straight from his website. Screenshot with his name on it. We've got the fourth day starting it, and we've got Passover right here, labeled the third day of the week. Now, this is a mapping to modern Gregorian weekdays, so he marks it as a Wednesday. But that's just because this year, the third day of the week marks a Wednesday, because you notice that the Sabbath is on a Sunday. And so as the Gregorian weeks move around, the mapping to that modern weekday changes. So you have to look at the third day of the week, which is a Tuesday. So if you want to compare his theory, he's saying that Passover was on a Tuesday. And then he labels unleavened bread. What's conspicuously missing is first fruits. So I don't know what his interpretation of first fruits is, but if you assume first fruits is always on the first day of the week, which it's supposed to be, and it's always after Passover, that means that he's probably saying first fruits is the 19th. So here we have Yeshua killed on the 14th and rising on the 19th, and that's 6 inclusive days, or 5 days if you count by hours divided by 24, between the death and resurrection. That's far, far more than 3 days and 3 nights. And there's just so many holes in there. Now, I've heard different excuses. Well, they don't think that he was actually killed on Passover. They think he was killed some days after Passover. But that, we're told by Paul and others that he was raised first fruits. So we know he was raised on the 19th, and we're told that he was our Passover lamb. So, that's a particular problem. So let's look at what the Septuagint says. Leviticus 23, verse 11. And he shall lift up the sheaf before Yahuwah to be accepted for you on the morrow after the first day, and this is referring to the first day of unleavened bread, which is the 15th day of the month. The priest shall lift it up. So, the offering of the barley sheaf on the day after the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread is Nisan 16 in the Jewish calendar. So, Josephus records that, but on the second day of unleavened bread, which is the 16th day of the month, they first partake on first fruits of the earth. Before that day, they do not touch them. So Josephus is always pegging it to the 16th day. 1 Corinthians says, now we know Christ is risen from dead and has become the first fruits of them that slept. So, first fruits is on the 16th day. That's the day he rose. And here we have him rising on the 19th. That's more than a day's issue. This is a really big gap, and these scriptures here, the Septuagint, highly reliable, and it's not incompatible with the Masoretic. The Masoretic says after the Sabbath, which if you're following a lunar Sabbath, it's no different. But either way, it doesn't work. So, that's just the beginning of sorrows for his calendar. Then let's go to the second month. In the 15th day, it's always marked as the 6th day of the week. So, I mentioned the Sabbath shifting from year to year. So this is the second month, 15th day of the month, is unleavened bread of second Passover. And he has that listed as a 6th day. So, the question is that 6th day a high Sabbath or not? Because if you're celebrating the second Passover, then for you it would be, but for others it wouldn't. That doesn't make sense to me. But so you're saying this is the 6th day is the 15th, right? And of course the Sabbath is here. So, but what does the scripture say is the 15th? I'm going to show you that the scriptures will show you that the 15th and the 22nd of the second month during the month of Exodus are documented as Sabbaths, as weekly Sabbaths. So, on the 15th day of the second month after they left the land of Egypt, that evening quail came and covered the camp, and in the morning, the 16th, there was a layer of dew, or manna, around the camp. Every morning, each one gathered as much as needed, and when the sun grew hot, it melted away. On the 6th day, they gathered twice as much. And he told them, this is what the Lord has said. Tomorrow is to be a complete rest and holy Sabbath to Yahuwah. So bake as much as you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Then set aside whatever remains until morning. So this verse makes it very clear that for 6 days, which is the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, and 21st, they gathered manna, and on the 22nd of the month, they rested. And so if the 22nd was a weekly Sabbath, the 15th was a weekly Sabbath as well. And that is not what his calendar is showing. So, conclusion. I'm certain Nick will probably find a way to parse these words to support his calendar or to discount sources that contradict him, like the Greek Septuagint or Josephus. However, to reject the Greek Septuagint while accepting other more dubious texts such as Jubilees is a matter of values that will be hard to overcome in any discussion. Because we'd have to debate, well, is Jubilees scripture? And if Jubilees is scripture but the Greek Septuagint isn't, that's really, I don't know. By default, I think Septuagint has the higher ground as being scripture, and Jubilees has the lower ground, and he's wanting to reverse. I don't know, but that's the challenge. So when seeking the truth, we must always consider the margin of error around all of our data. Every word of every verse has a margin of interpretation, and definitively disproving someone requires your proof remain valid regardless of any reasonable interpretation within the margin of error. So I'm not going to get into word parsing games debating the one true interpretation of a word in isolation. All words must be judged and interpreted in the context of the broader scripture, not in isolation. And we must be willing to live with ambiguity rather than force a singular interpretation. I hope that this has given you food for thought. I look forward to any explanations of how you explain away the problems with Exodus during the second month and Passover. But either way, I would say you've far from checkmated someone in the lunar Sabbath camp. Thank you. Have a great day.